So in this section, we're going to talk about some identity security services, particularly multi-factor authentication. Now, what is multi-factor authentication? Now, one of the big challenges with security these days is that people have user IDs and passwords, and no matter how complicated your password is, if it's 16 digits, contains letters, numbers, symbols, capitals, and funny foreign letter characters in the same password, if that password gets lost, someone breaks into your computer and steals it, or something becomes easy to guess, etc., that allows somebody to log in as you and basically be able to take over what it is that you have control over. So a user ID and password is not entirely secure simply because it can be lost. Now, when you add another factor to it, then that becomes even more secure. In this case, when they're talking about multi-factor authentication, it's either having a device, whether it could be your phone, or in the old days they used to have key fobs with randomized numbers on them, or it could be a fingerprint or an eye scan, etc., retina scan. So the multi-factor authentication refers to having more than just your password as a way of authenticating. And that's why it becomes more and more common for you to require your phone, and either you get an SMS message, you get an email, or you get a randomized number in an application that you have to type in order to log in just beyond your password. Now, Microsoft Azure Active Directory does support this. Either you have to pay for it, so it is available as an add-on service. It costs $1.40 per month per user, so there is a billing model associated with that, unless you're a premium Active Directory user. So if you are running on a premium plan, then it is included in that plan. Now, how do you turn on Active Directory? So in this particular case, I go into Users. Now I have a mixture of native users, Azure Active Directory, and invited users. Invited users in this case are B2B. These are Gmail accounts in this particular case. Email went out to them, they accepted, and they are part of my Active Directory, but they are not Active Directory members because their email address isn't a controlled domain. So we have this new user and guest user concept. So once I'm in the users section of my Active Directory, you'll see it says multi-factor authentication at the top. When I click this, it's actually going to take me out of the portal into a separate website. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we can see it is a Microsoft website, but it's basically completely different than the portal, and it's opened in a new tab of my browser actually. Now, out of my 5 users, remember 2 of them are actually Active Directory users and 2 of them are Gmail users, which are B2B. So I can actually only enable multi-factor authentication for 2 of those users. You can't enable it for users that are not part of your Active Directory as native users. So I've chosen the 2 of them, and I can click Enable. Now it says about enabling multi-factor. Basically, they're going to have to sign in through the web browser in order to sign up for multi-factor authentication. If they access your services through their app, through some other method, might not actually work. So here's a link to how these individual users, Joe Green and John Doe, can sign up for MFA. But I control them, and so I can actually enable multi-factor. So now I've enabled multi-factor authentication on 2 users in my account, and that's basically how easy it is. Now, if I remember, this is a separate tab, I can close the tab, go back to the portal. Now, keep in mind that there is an impact on the support, basically, for your Active Directory. So now that you've got users that are forced to use multi-factor authentication, what you're going to end up with doing is people have their ID, they have their password, but they don't have their phone, their battery has died, they lose their phone, or they changed their phone number but they didn't migrate their multi-factor authentication. So there is another point of support once you make it more complicated for people to log in. But remember, security is not about convenience. Security in some ways is the opposite of convenience, because the more convenient you make something, the less secure it generally is. You're going to have to introduce things like this, having to have your phone to answer an SMS text or an app in order to log into your system as a way to increase security. So turning on multi-factor authentication is one way to do it through the users, right? So we can either go to an individual user or select all users and say we want to enable multi-factor authentication for those people. Another way to do it is to have what's called conditional access. If we scroll down to the security settings of our Active Directory, there is a conditional access setting. And conditional access is basically a policy that you can set that will turn on multi-factor authentication only under specific circumstances. So instead of it being dependent on the user, yes or no, true or false, it's dependent on a combination of circumstances. Now there's a baseline policy here that we can see that basically says require multi-factor authentication for high-level roles. And so that policy, if you turned on conditional access, basically requires multi-factor authentication for global administrators, SharePoint administrators, Exchange administrators, conditional access administrators, and security administrators. These are powerful roles within your Active Directory and within your applications. And so automatically enabling this policy for those individuals makes a certain amount of sense. And we can see that we can actually use policy immediately, which means that these people would have to set up multi-factor authentication, or enable in the future, which means as we add administrators into our account, that's going to get enabled, or we can just say we do not want to use this policy, but there's a big orange exclamation mark saying this means your admins are vulnerable. So I'm going to leave the setting that it was automatically. We can go and create another policy. So this is called using access outside the office, okay, as an example. So we can say that we want to affect all users, okay, all apps, and the condition being that the location is not one of your trusted locations. So we want to turn on MFA for any location, but we will exclude what's called a trusted location. And that means we can configure a trusted location as in another area within MFA here, okay? So any access outside the office, if I was to enable this policy, this is the condition, but we can say grant access and require multi-factor authentication. So we can basically allow people to log in from outside the office, but require multi-factor authentication. Of course, you can just deny access, so people must be in a trusted location within that's basically their IP address and what network they're connected to. You could block that, or you could say, well, you know what, that's a little bit of a more suspicious, and we have to be a bit more careful with people logging in outside the office. So Microsoft Azure allows you to enable conditional access that only turns on multi-factor authentication in certain circumstances. Now, if we go back to the conditions, we can see that it's not just locations, it's the devices that they use, it's the apps, the state of the device, whether this is more of the sign-in risk is a machine learning type algorithm that will basically classify somebody's login as being high, medium, low, or no risk. And so let's say we want people who are outside the office and medium and high risk to have to use multi-factor authentication. And so there's a machine learning component that Microsoft will assign a risk factor. That could be the person's logging in from areas that have never seen anyone log in before, far distant locations away from your office, etc. Okay. So if we turn this policy on, this will basically enable multi-factor authentication in certain circumstances. So we can remember we said about trusted locations. Certainly we can add a location. For instance, this is home office, and mark as a trusted location, and we can say that this IP address, we can use a range here, so /24, is a trusted location, and I'm going to call that home office, right? Now I've got a trusted location, so when my conditional access policy says multi-factor authentication is required except if it's in a trusted location, now I have a trusted location. So this definitely is a lot of flexibility in setting up multi-factor authentication only in specific cases. So let's talk about some of the settings that you can get for multi-factor authentication. We're back at the Active Directory overview screen, and if I scroll down under Security, I can see there's an MFA settings tab under Security. When I go in there, it's a whole new section of the site. Let's talk about fraud alerts first. I'm going to click Fraud Alert. Now, by default, fraud alerts are turned off. I have it turned on here because I was testing. But basically, if you enable fraud alerts, this allows your users to report it if they do receive a two-step verification request. So if they get that SMS message or that email asking them to enter the number and they didn't initiate that request, then they can click a link or they can call a number and basically say they're getting this for not a reason that they initiated. If you do enable fraud alerts, then you can actually automatically block those users. So somebody's user ID and password has been compromised, and now they're getting the third factor authentication alert. They say it wasn't me, and so you can basically block their account. Okay. Now the blocked accounts go under this block, unblock users list. So a blocked user will no longer receive a multi-factor authentication request. So once they've reported the fraud and you have that turned on, then they're going to go end up into this blocked list, and it's going to take 90 days, 3 whole months, for them to go unblocked. So again, it's a support issue where you're going to have to go in here and unblock people and maybe force them to change their passwords, etc. So fraud alerts basically lead to people getting their account shut down, but that's obviously a more secure thing in terms of detecting when people are trying to hack into your accounts. So let's say that you have a user who their phone is dead or they lost their phone and they need to be able to log in to do their work, but they don't have the third factor, the multi-factor authentication. Is there anything that you can do for them? Well, there is a setting called one-time bypass. So if we go down to here, we can basically say one of these users will get 300 seconds, which is a 5-minute period of time, where they can log in using their user ID and password without performing the multi-factor authentication. So if I go in here, it says 300 seconds. I can look for John Doe, 300 seconds. Give it a reason. He lost his phone. And now user John Doe is being allowed to log in for the next 300 seconds. It goes into effect immediately and expires in that 5 minutes, where he can log in, and even though multi-factor authentication is turned on, it'll allow him to get past that step just for a limited period of time. So this is another way that your support staff can help users who are struggling with their multi-factor authentication. All right, so we're back to looking at multi-factor authentication. In this video, we're going to talk about the methods that users can use to authenticate themselves. So we're on our Active Directory, we're going to go into MFA. Now, I should have said earlier, there are two types of MFA servers. There is one type of server where you can download the server software and have that running within your own environment, and another type of MFA, which is cloud-based MFA. So when we were configuring those users for MFA, it took us to a separate website, and that was the cloud-based MFA. So let's talk about the verification methods for those users. I say configure cloud-based MFA. Takes me back to the second website. Now we have our users that we already saw how to enable MFA, and there's another tab called Service Settings. Now there are a number of settings up here, but we're going to scroll down to the verification options. You'll see that by default we have 4 verification options. One is a phone call, so they can actually receive a phone call that says enter the following number. Another is a text message, an SMS-based message. Third is a mobile app, so they would have a verification app that would basically set a notification to them. And the fourth one is that they're going to use that app that has a code in it that they have to then enter into the login. Okay, so there are 4 methods available for users to authenticate. Now it's possible that you don't want the apps to be involved at all, that the only method you accept for multi-factor authentication is a text message. That's entirely up to you. But as long as you accept the security of phone calls, text messages, and mobile apps running on their trusted device, then all 4 methods are equally secure. But of course, if you've got concerns that the SIM card is going to be spoofed, then they're going to have to only authenticate through their mobile app and not through a traditional phone method. Oh, that would be up to you. And so that would be settings through here within configure cloud-based MFA server. Now I will talk about, we were looking at conditional access earlier, and there's another way other than configuring conditional access. We could enable trusted IPs where multi-factor authentication is skipped for requests from users on your own intranet. So if you have an office, let's go back to my IP here. If you have an office and you can set a set of ranges, IP ranges in CIDR format, then that will skip MFA for users that are connected to your application through that network. Okay, gotta click Save for that. So talking about Active Directory, really we've been talking about identity, right? This is identity as a service. Also, it could be authentication as a service. Basically, we have users. Those users have passwords. If we have MFA enabled, then they have to provide a code. And those 3 pieces of information basically prove to us that they are who they say they are. And that's the authentication aspect of it. But once they're authenticated, what can they do? What is their authority? What is their authorization? And so we haven't to this point talked about authorization. To do that, we're going to get out of Active Directory and we're going to go into, in this case, a resource group. Now, when you go into any particular resource within Azure, you will see typically this access control setting. Not only is it there for the resource group level, but if we were to go down into a resource itself, which hopefully this won't take too long. So even within a virtual machine level, we do have this access control setting. Go back up to the resource group level. If we go into access control, this is where it allows us to control access to whoever's going to be able to get into this resource group, who's going to be able to see the resources, who's going to be able to modify anything, add new resources, or even in the case of owners, create new users who can then access those things. So check access, right? So we can basically say, let's say as if if John Doe, I've got a user named John Doe. Let's see what John Doe's permissions are. John Doe has no permissions, right? He's not allowed, he's not denied. Basically, he would not be able to see any of these resources because nothing allows him to do it. But what if we wanted John Doe to be able to access those virtual machines, or to access the Logic app in this case? This, what we want to do is we want to add a role assignment. Now, I'm going to go into this role assignments here. By default, you're going to have some role assignments. Some of them are going to be inherited from the subscription level. So we can go into the subscription level and look at the access controls in there. You can see them all here being inherited. I don't have any access that's been specifically granted to this resource group that is not just inherited from above. Okay. My main account is in there. The Cloud DIN is a cost tracking application. Some of these are automatic, so the service principal and things like that. Automation accounts that create accounts for themselves. Okay. So let's say we wanted to add a John Doe to have access. Now, first we have to decide what role we want to give John Doe. The three main roles that you need to understand are owner, contributor, and reader. You can see that there are dozens of other roles, and we'll get into them in a second. But the top three, owner, contributor, and reader, are key. The reader role, as the name suggests, just gives you read-only access to those resources. That means that if you logged into the portal, you can see the resource group, you can go into the resource group, you can see the resources there, you can click into the resources and you can see them, but you can't make any changes. You can't stop them, you can't edit them, you can't delete them. Read-only access is the reader role. Now the contributor role is like a full set of permissions. You can go into a resource group in this case, create resources, delete resources, edit resources. You just can't give that permission to other users. So you're a full-on manager of these resources, but you can't make your friend a manager as well. The owner permission is the most powerful, and this, more than anything, is the keys to the castle. So do not hand out owner permission to your account or to specific resource groups unless you really know what you're doing. But the owner permission basically allows you to manage everything just like a contributor, and you can also grant access to other users. And so your friend can also get contributor access, and your other friend can also get owner access, etc. So that's reader, contributor, and owner. Now as we scroll down these lists of other predefined roles, you can see very similar naming like backup reader, backup contributor, backup operator, CDN endpoint contributor, CDN endpoint reader, etc. There's a lot of contributor and reader roles against many of the services inside of Azure, Event Grid, Document DB, Log Analytics, etc. So we basically have the ability to give very fine-grained permissions to individuals using role-based access control. I'm going to give our friend contributor access, John Doe. So I've chosen contributor, and I'm going to say I'm going to assign it to a user, and that user is John Doe, and it's selected John Doe. So once I save it, it's going to do a deployment that basically adds John Doe, and we can see John Doe, a user, has been given contributor access only to this resource group. So if we go back to check access and we check John Doe's access, now we can see he's got contributor permissions specifically assigned to this group. Okay, and so pretty much that's a role-based access control. Now we could obviously go in here, and if we wanted to ensure that somebody, no matter what permissions they have, that could be inherited, let's say that I want my other account specifically to be denied access. Okay, so my other account here is denied access as a contributor. It's almost an opposite. It blocks users from performing specific actions, even if they've got access through some other way. Okay. So Scott Duffy was added contributor. So that's basically role-based access control. It can happen at the resource level, at the resource group level. We saw basically going into a subscription, we've got access control options at the subscription level. So you can just, for, in this case, I don't mind showing you, someone who works for me has contributor access to my entire account, and they can create resources, and I've given them permission to do so, right? And so we can see that basically this is one way of ensuring that people can either have access or be denied access. So that's the authority essentially to do things, as opposed to the authentication, which is taken care of by Azure Active Directory. Now we've seen that the Microsoft Azure comes with dozens of what's called built-in roles, and again it covers all of those individual Azure services. And so you can basically assign users very specific and granular permissions, maybe reader permissions to some set of resources, and then contributor permissions to other sets of resources. But what if none of these roles are good enough for you? Okay, because you've got these extremely broad roles, owner, contributor, and reader, and then you've got dozens of very, very granular roles. So what you might need is what's called a custom role. Now there is not an add role button within the portal here, but we can go and create a custom role using either PowerShell or CLI. Now the technique that Microsoft recommends is that you take the role and basically save it to a JSON file. Take an existing role. Let's say you take the reader role, and then you then modify it. So it's easier to edit an existing role than to sort of come up from scratch with a role definition. So it's showing you the example here on the Microsoft website of putting a reader role into a JSON file and then editing the file to allow Microsoft support services within that, for instance. Okay, so you create this new reader support tickets role, and you granting Microsoft.support action star, which means full access to that set of services. Okay, so now you've basically modified an existing role, given it one more additional permission, and you're calling it reader support tickets. And so from that point forward, you can assign users that role. You can list those roles. You'll see these roles listed in the portal. When you go to assign people into roles, you'll see it. You can update it, you can delete. So custom roles really are a way of making very specific permissions for your specific circumstances. Instead of being forced into Microsoft's extremely granular roles, you can say, well, this is what a developer is, this is what a customer service representative, this is what DevOps does, etc., and create a complete package of permissions into a single role, and then you assign those roles to people. And that's why it's called role-based access control.